Glenn Finn checks his beehive at the bottom of a Hampshire garden. There's nothing unusual about that, maybe, except that he integrates beekeeping with advertising and marketing for a small publishing company. This is a working environment where the strict divisions between work and leisure are not apparent, a place which is constantly informed by the quest to create a sustainable future. At the other end of the garden is another hive of activity, a tiny office where they produce Permaculture magazine.
Transitional toilet article, and there aren't any photographs with it. What you've got here is his diagrams, which, have you received those on disc, or are you going to have to scan them?
No, I'm going to have to scan them as they are, which should be all right, I think. They're fairly clear.
Inspired by a television documentary about permaculture, designer Tim Harlan decided to propagate the idea of permanent agriculture. Following much study and research, he persuaded his wife Maddie and their business partners to launch a new venture. They decided to produce a magazine for the growing number of people interested in solutions to environmental problems. Now, with an estimated readership of 20,000, Permaculture magazine has captured imaginations all over the world. It's the leading UK journal on practical ways to create sustainable lifestyles. Unusually, the people who work here practice what they preach, and the permaculture garden behind the house is as much part of their lives as the computer screen and the fax machine. The editor, Maddie Harland, explains part of the garden design.
I'm planting a small bush tomato in the vegetable garden, which is located in Zone 1 near the house and near the greenhouse. The house is really termed in permaculture design as Zone 0, and then the zone nearest to your centre of human activity is Zone 1. The idea behind this is that instead of hiding a vegetable garden behind a hedgerow right at the end of the garden, we put our most delicate plants that can be damaged by pests nearest the house where we visit frequently, and then we can look after them.
This area contains a mixture of annual and perennial vegetables. It will also be planted with flowers. They not only provide colour close to the house, but attract predatory insects which help keep the pests in check.
And in this area we've been experimenting with different ways of mulching the beds, because one of the most important aspects of sustainable design is preserving and indeed increasing soil fertility rather than losing it and having it washed away. So on this bed we've used a mulch right over the soil of semi-composted wood bark mixed with human urine, which is very high in nitrogen. On other beds, on the bed behind me, which is just waiting to be planted, we have homemade garden compost, which is basically lots and lots of kitchen waste mixed up with poultry bedding. So you get all the nitrogen of poultry manure mixed up with organic matter. We also grow a lot of comfrey on this site, specifically to cut 2 or 3 times a year and add to the kitchen waste. Comfrey is a really good activator for composting systems. It also is high in phosphates, which help the budding of fruits and vegetables and the setting generally of vegetables.
Where weeds are well-established perennials, like nettles and couch grass, exclusion mulching with black polythene kills the weeds, warms the soil, and generally contributes to low maintenance. Permaculture design combines everything you'd expect to find in an organic garden with other elements such as eco-architecture and appropriate technology. The aim is to create a more sustainable environment with maximum output for minimum labour. Layers of diversity are added by designating part of the garden as wilderness to encourage even more species.
Six years ago, this was an intensively farmed arable field. When we came to acquire the land, the first thing we did was to sow a wildflower meadow. This was to create instant diversity and give a ground cover, and a great deal of joy and pleasure as well. And now I'm giving it the first cut of the season to keep the grass down and to allow the wildflowers a little bit more room to come up.
In addition to surface area, permaculture design takes account of gradient, aspect, height, volume and microclimate. In the temperate latitudes of southern England, skillful layering of trees, shrubs and edible plants is the best way to obtain high yields, as Tim explains.
Further away from the house, we have the forest garden. We started this 5 years ago with the planting of the fruit trees. Here we have an almond which forms the back part of the forest garden and is on a rootstock which will allow it to grow to a modest height of perhaps 15 or so feet. As we move forward, we have trees which are on rootstocks which will allow them to grow to a lower height, and at the front, on the meadow side, we have trees that are growing on dwarfing rootstocks. This allows for a tiered canopy facing the sun, which will allow the sun maximum penetration into the lower levels so that we can grow our shrub layer and other things.
At lunchtime, Maddie demonstrates the good sense of growing vegetables close to the house in Zone 1. Nobody likes picking salads in the pouring rain, but at least they're not down at the bottom of the garden. In a large-scale permaculture design, there can be as many as 6 zones of activity, each one carefully planned, taking account of local conditions, working with nature and creating diversity. After lunch, Maddie talks about more subtle design features like this little chicken run, which serves several purposes.
This is the greenhouse, which is in Zone 1, placed right in the vegetable garden. I'm sitting on a chicken house here, which run exudes outside there. The chicken has an advantage in the greenhouse in that it exudes CO2 and it also heats the greenhouse. It also makes us come in here very regularly so we can tend the plants. And on the plant side we're growing grape here, various different types of tomato, pepinos, lemongrass, and we also use this greenhouse to propagate plants as well. And there's a number of plants from bush tomatoes to tayberries to strawberries, and also a lot of Rosa rugosa which we're propagating as forage in the chicken run.
Critics of permaculture say that it offers little new beyond the techniques of organic gardening and crop layering which have been known for centuries. But the genius of co-founders Bill Mollison and David Holmgren is that they've combined the ancient art of food production with the modern science of ecology. And there's more, as Maddie explains.
Permaculture is a way of making sustainable human environments which not only nurture, feed and shelter the human beings who share them, but also don't despoil or take from nature and the planet. So it's a system of caring for people, but at the same time caring for the earth. It's a system that can be as big as a large-scale farm or a village or town design, or as small as a small urban backyard, allotment, or even a window box. And permaculture is very much all about ordinary people being able to do things for themselves to tread more lightly on the planet. It's not a system necessarily for experts, it's for ordinary people, so that everybody can contribute to preserving the environment by what they do in their own lives.
This garden is just the start. Future plans include building on local permaculture networks and helping to create a 55-acre centre for sustainability on the site of a former naval base. Community involvement is central to the thinking in Yorkshire, where permaculture design adapts to very different surroundings. Everywhere in Britain, people on housing estates like this are paying the price of unemployment, coupled with the excesses of 60s urban planning. But one glimmer of hope is Springfield Gardens in Bradford, where residents can contribute to a new mapping of their future. Project manager Chris Mackenzie-Davey explains the background to this site.
The Homewood estate here on the edge of Bradford has some 10,000 residents, and it was built in the early 60s, and very soon, like a lot of these big housing estates, it developed some very serious problems around high unemployment and poverty. But one thing this estate has developed is very strong community leadership, and that led to the estate winning a City Challenge bid. One of the ideas the village executive had was for a horticultural centre, and when the City Challenge bid was won, this idea was taken up, and permaculture was brought in to facilitate the development of the centre. The funding we've had is something like £220,000 over 3.5 years, and so far we're 2.5 years into the project. More than anything, this project is about the people of the estate, and among our aims are to encourage the local people to grow food, to challenge issues such as health. People suffer from very poor diet around here, and also economic things. Growing your own food can save quite a bit of money. We're also trying to improve the environment of the estate through getting people to grow food in their own gardens, and therefore we hope will take a greater care for the environment as a whole.
The site at Springfield was planned by permaculture designer Andy Langford. Central to his idea was inspiring local people to grow their own food.
Most of the houses on Homewood have a small garden, and what we're in here is our demonstration garden, which is about the same size as the typical garden on the estate. And what we're trying to do here is illustrate a variety of techniques, showing people how to produce their own food, and showing them that it's both easy and cheap.
Intensive techniques of cultivation can be enormously productive, and even the smallest plot can make a healthy contribution in the growing season. What's more, these vegetables are fresh, not like the jet-lagged produce we've grown accustomed to from the supermarkets. Further up the hill, they're growing crops on a larger scale using some innovative techniques.
What I'm sitting amongst here is the cash crop area of the site, and this is a system that's been developed by a volunteer down here called Mark Fisher. What we got on my right here is 2 metre wide beds, which are mulch beds, and there where the crops go, they have paths running up between them so that you never actually tread on the bed themselves. And then beside me here is what's a bit different about this system, and this is what we call a pest predator strip. And so the plants we're growing in here are ones that attract in insects that will eat pests that are attacking the vegetables in the beds. So we have 2 of the vegetable beds, 1 pest predator bed, then another 2 of the vegetable beds, and so on down the field. And it's something certainly fairly experimental at the moment, but it seems to be working very well.
The importance of growing food close to where it's needed can't be overstated. In the last 10 years, there's been a huge increase in transport generated by the supermarkets. Initiatives like this help to create regional food markets where produce doesn't need to travel thousands of miles to reach your plate. One of the principles of permaculture is to make problems into solutions. So old tyres, which are the bane of any waste disposal authority, can be put to good use and even symbolise a new beginning. Eventually, these shapes by the front entrance will be an embankment of wild and cultivated flowers. Essentially, this place is all about people and how they can be inspired by permaculture. A volunteer, Terry Brown, had no experience of gardening before coming to Springfield. He decided to brighten the place up with annual flowers. He also came up with some novel ideas for using the drain pipes which had been left all over the site.
You reach right to the back? Yeah, go on then. Okay, that's it. Brilliant.
As more and more people become involved, so the strong community feeling of Holmwood Estate is reinforced and will further encourage productive gardening. And it's not all about work and productivity. As the site matures, areas of green tranquility begin to take shape. There's a woodland walk planned to enhance the borders of the site, and there's an abundance of wild flowers to add colour and beauty. As the name Springfield would suggest, there's plenty of water on this site, and the design incorporates some unusual methods of irrigation.
This is one of the two springs we have on Springfield, hence our name, and we're planning to use this water to stock for fish ponds, to fill up fish ponds, which we're going to be producing for, you're producing fish for food. The problem we have is that, like a lot of springs in areas where there's been coal mining, the water is extremely iron rich. In this case, it would kill something like 50% of fish. So we need to clean some of that iron out before we have it down to the fish ponds. And we're planning to do that in two ways. Firstly, by aerating the water using these little sort of flow forms we've built, and secondly, by putting reeds into the 3 ponds we've got, and the roots of the reeds bring oxygen down into the water. And we reckon we can take out about 90% of the iron just simply by doing that.
The problem is that much of the surface water has a habit of drying out in the summer, and commercial irrigation schemes would be costly to install and uneconomic to maintain. There's a much simpler way, working with nature by digging special ditches which exactly follow the contours, as Chris explains.
Well, what I'm standing in is a swale, and it's dry at this time of year, but over the winter this would be almost completely full of water. We have a swale here because we get a lot of surface water coming down the hill behind me, and it's causing a lot of waterlogging in the land below this. And what the swale does is just slow the water down, really. It stops it moving so quickly, and so the effect is that over winter it dries it out, and the water is slowly released in the early part of the growing season in the spring, and so keeping the ground more moist, and that way we're getting a nice balance in the water over the site. It has a whole load of uses apart from that, though. It's great for wildlife, gives us a whole series of different growing conditions, from dry at the top of the bank to very wet down here at the bottom, and something we can exploit in many ways.
Of course, no permaculture site is complete without its trees, but here there's still much growing to do before they reach maturity.
We've planted some 4,000 trees on the site, and it's really nice to have one now that's taller than I am. This is an area of forest garden, and behind me to the southwest we've got hardier species of fruits, things like apples and hazels, and then in front of me we've got the more tender things like the pears, so hopefully the apples will shelter the pears.
As the trees slowly establish themselves, so a lot more volunteers offer their help, and Springfield is becoming a focus for the community. Now the essential groundwork is complete, ideas for future development include equipping the buildings with workshop facilities and a farmhouse kitchen. Value will then be added to the commercial crops by freezing fruit or turning it into jam. They plan to employ 6 people over 2 years, creating an experienced workforce who can help community business to establish. There are schemes to start courses in horticulture and help children with learning difficulties. In addition to doubling the area of cash crops, a wind turbine will be installed to keep goods and services close to home. There's still a long way to go, but already Springfield has been described in the government's Greening of the City report as best practice on a national level. Best of all, this project has made a significant impact on its surroundings, putting people back in touch with their ability to grow food and generally make changes for the better. Away to the southwest, the pursuit of sustainability poses a different set of challenges for the people of Chagford in rural Devon. The Courtyard Cafe, run by the Proper Job Co-op, has become a central focus for local information about permaculture and sustainability. In addition to an everyday menu, the cafe sells organic produce, craft items, plants and books. It's also home to the local exchange trading system, known as LETS for short. This enables people to swap skills, goods and services in a local currency known as tins. All this sprang from small beginnings with a community composting scheme. Project coordinator Nikki Scott explains.
The composting project came about because I noticed that an awful lot of people from Tregford just dumping garden materials. I don't like to call them waste anymore because they're resources, by the way. Just dumping them into the civic amenity skips in the car park. And so I rang up County Hall and said, this is crazy with the problems it's causing for landfill. Surely we can do something with them, you know. We can compost them. Why don't you send someone round with a shredder? And the Allotment Association, myself, will compost them. And Gerard Cooper, who I talked to there, thought that would be too difficult to arrange, but he did suggest that they gave us a shredder and that we picked up the materials and we shredded them up and composted them. And we've been doing that for the last 3 years or more now and making a lot of compost. As I said, it doesn't attract a huge amount of volunteers. You need some sort of fairly hardcore people to do that, and the cafe volunteers have been a lot easier to come along. But now we can give them a free lunch in the cafe and trade in tins with our compost. And we've also got this sieve now, so we can sieve out and make a much better quality product. And we've stuck at it for 3 years, whereas, you know, it's quite a difficult thing to keep going. The amount of materials we've had brought has increased. First of all, it seemed to double every month because we were collecting them on a monthly basis when the skip came. And it's sort of stabilised now, but we can be slightly phased by very large trailer loads of what used to be called green waste, which as I said is a resource.
Nicky's time is now divided between work in the shop, setting up composting schemes all over Devon, and growing food for his family. Any surplus goes to the cafe.
Well, this is some of our garlic. We're doing a whole quarter of the allotment bed in garlic this year, 3 different varieties. Growing an awful lot so we can hopefully supply the cafe with some as well, and the shop. Now I thought this bed was interesting because this was very weed infested before, and we did very serious barrier mulching on it. You can just see odd bits of paper around, heavy newspaper, cardboard, and then masses of grass cuttings on top. And it was sown up with a green manure crop, some of which you might be able to see in the foreground, the Phacelia here. Those are just volunteers from that crop, which I've left because they're good to attract predatory insects such as hoverflies. And it's left the soil in superb condition for this garlic, which I'm very pleased with. And if we get a nice dry end to the season, it should harvest beautifully.
On an adjacent bed, a different technique has been employed to achieve long-lasting fertility.
Although it's not normal to see this amount of bare soil in a permaculture system, this is actually the 4th year of what's called a German mound garden. And what we did here is we excavated the top foot or so spit of soil, put it to one side, and then another spit in the middle. And that way we could get rid of a lot of woody materials that we had. Instead of composting them, instead of shredding them up first or burning them, they've been buried deep down in the soil. So it's a kind of slow compost heap. And on top of that have gone layers of leaves, shreddings, some garden compost, and then the earth back on top. And this is the 4th year in the rotation. It's going to be sown up for carrots now. I sow them late to avoid the first generations of carrot fly, so it's ready to go right away. Of course, it wouldn't be real permaculture without trees. We're trying to establish a line of trees up the edge of our allotment, and with a lot of bushes and shrubs and other plants underneath. This cherry's been in its 2nd year of cropping, and as long as the birds don't get them all, I hope we'll get a good crop of cherries this year. And the blackcurrants will help with the cherries too, and help establish a windbreak and a whole lot of other things. And we're going to plant up more strawberries, ground cover strawberries, raspberries around. We've got some hawthorn growing here. We've got some wild plants for insect attraction. And it's all starting to happen down the edge. Further up on the allotments there's an example of a very well established forest edge, which you'll see how it looks in a few years. This is what I hope our allotment will look like eventually. Some beautiful mature apple trees and other fruit trees and nut trees, some fruit bushes in front, and in front of that, sheltering from the wind, there's a hedge and other trees to break it up, allowing these trees to really mature and develop nicely.
On a nearby plot, David Osbiston attends to his chicken house. Made with recycled wood, this unique structure on a central pole is easy to clean and keeps the chickens safe from predators. A deliberately rickety access ladder will support the weight of a bird, but would collapse if climbed by a fox or badger. Maximum output for minimum labour is the result of thoughtful design. The welfare of these chickens is easily maintained simply by building an appropriate environment. Maintaining biological diversity is central to permaculture. So, following absurd legislation controlling the sale of seeds, people here have decided to fight back.
This is one of my favourites. It's a asparagus kale. It's a very tender kale. When it's a bit past its best at the moment. When it's younger, the tops are just like sprouting broccoli. You can pick them up, pick off lots and lots of little heads and steam them up. The only trouble is you can't buy the seed of this one. It's a rare variety, which is why I'm saving my own seed from a good clump of very good plants. And hopefully I'm going to have enough to supply Henry Doubleday's Heritage Seed Library with some, so that other people can keep it going, and enough for the Chagford Seed Savers Club too. And if everyone did that with some rare varieties, we'd soon get the genetic diversity back, which has been decimated by draconian European legislation recently. We've got the worst legislation in the world here, and it's important that gardeners fight back at this bureaucratic insanity.
Chagford allotments are within walking distance of the centre of the village and the cafe, which brings producer and consumer into direct contact. The work here has already attracted a fair amount of media attention for its innovative stance on regenerating the local economy.
We rip that off. Can you get these little ones in here?
It's a place where families come to work and relax, where young children can be introduced to the wonders of nature. In addition, the Chagford initiatives are slowly getting known by foreign visitors who run similar schemes abroad. Today it's the turn of Edson Mashudu from Zimbabwe to meet local people and exchange ideas.
There's gooseberry clubs. There's clubs with everything in this country, but they you cook them, usually cook them and with sugar and make a pudding.
Okay.
But Eric actually does things with them. He does he makes pizzas with them and slices them up and uses them as a savoury as well. He does all sorts of interesting things.
Edson is coordinator of the Sustainable Agriculture project at Silvera House outside Harare. Financed by Christian Aid, his team are seeking to educate people in sustainable food production using permaculture techniques. The project makes a real difference to rural farmers during years of drought in Zimbabwe. When the rest of the countryside may be brown and scorched, the plots of people who took training courses remained green and productive.
This is actually another one, which is it's a bit of a shame because that will cross. But in fact, I've grown this one and this one together now for years, and the books say that they cross, and you get all sorts of problems. But in fact, they just, because the leaves are so different, you can actually tell the difference very simply. I think they, maybe if you sowed some from my packet, you get both coming up, but you can tell the difference, and they're both endangered varieties, and they're both very good. They're very tough.
Last year alone, some 300 farmers attended Silvera House, which means that more than 1,500 people will benefit from better and cheaper food production. Experience from Zimbabwe will inspire future schemes here in Chagford. As Nikki explains, the goal of sustainability is getting closer.
As the plans have changed with opening the cafe, So the other plans have changed around quite a bit as well. And we're now thinking much more along the lines of getting some land so we can grow food and use the compost from the compost project to help grow that food. And then we've got the cafe to sell the food once we've grown it. And we're also very interested in training and showing people how large-scale market gardening, organic produce could work. And it may be, depending on the scale that we go, using some sort of machinery. And to that end, I've spent the last year training in organic horticulture at Dartington, learning about some of these techniques of tractor base and researching that a lot more, because it's an area that there isn't an awful lot of information about. And I feel that it's very important for small communities to be able to produce their own food without having to import, carrots from Australia or have the ridiculous scenario of parsnips moving from Penzance to Lincoln and then back to Exeter before they're sold. We need to be able to grow good food organically where it's going to be consumed.
It's now about 15 years since permaculture was first introduced to Britain, and in that short space of time it's already made a major practical contribution to the way we think about growing food and creating viable economic communities. We're now seeing the first fruits of a revolution which could benefit everyone. Given the right regional marketing strategy, a 60-acre farm and a lot of hard work, permaculture provides jobs and economic stability. On Ragman's Lane Farm, close to the River Wye in the Forest of Dean, there's an example of what can be achieved. The most striking feature on this land is the newly created pond, where small farmer Matt Dunwell occasionally finds time to swim or relax. Having such a large body of water close to the farm buildings adds light to the house and acts as a safeguard against fire. Apart from providing a home for many species of aquatic plants and animals, this water serves many other purposes, as Matt explains.
Its main function is to provide a water source for the vegetable garden below. But we also find that we're able to feed the pigs from the pond to a certain extent, more as a sort of mineral supplement to the pigs rather than their main staple food. But this pondweed here, Canadian pondweed, is quite high in protein. And the reed mace, which you can see here, is very high in carbohydrate. So if you combine those and feed them to the pigs, preferably chopped up so that they can, they eat it basically, it forms a very nice pig feed supplement. So that's one crop that we have from the pond. It's also quite a rich source of protein. The tadpoles in this pond in March and April form a black strip all the way around the edge, and we raise about 150 meat chickens at that time of year, and they form this band of chickens all the way around the pond eating tadpoles, which is nature in the raw, but it does serve to produce an awful amount of protein from a totally low input system. There's nothing that we have to do at all to provide that protein.
Additional design features increase diversity and productivity.
I'm standing on a chinampa, which is a fancy name for a piece of land sticking out into a body of water. When people build ponds, they normally build round ponds, which is a way of making the minimum edge for the maximum volume. And we all know that around the edge of a system is where it is its most productive. So the small fish and tadpoles will tend to live in the areas around the edge of a body of water. In the middle of a body of water, there's not much happening. On the chinampas, we've planted this willow, and we'll be using this to make artist charcoal and also weaving it as willow hurdles. You get phenomenal rates of growth from freshwater bodies like this. I planted these willows in March this year. It's now July, so 5 months later, they're about 9 feet tall. So you can get an idea of the rate of growth from this sort of system.
And that's not the whole story. The main reason for constructing such a large body of water is to be found a short distance away in the market garden area of the farm. Here they can grow a whole range of high-value crops and not have to worry about drought. Mandy Pullen is in charge here, and to make best use of the irrigation system, she's planted the rows of vegetables along the contours. With sheep grazing on the dam wall in winter, there's an additional runoff of nutrients as well. In this 1-acre field, Mandy and her helpers grow 150 different varieties of vegetables for sale in the local area. Much of the produce goes direct to the customers via a veggie box scheme. Now becoming popular all over the country, the box system enables people to buy fresh organic vegetables direct from the grower. Collection from a central pickup point neatly sidesteps the stranglehold which supermarkets have on food production. It also means that money is kept circulating in the local community rather than financing corporate foreign investment. There's no denying that this little market garden involves a lot of hard work, but it's terribly productive. And with the shortest possible route between producer and consumer, it means that the vegetables are sold in tip-top condition with minimal loss of nutrition. Together with easy irrigation, contour planting and the encouragement of predatory insects, chickens help ease the burden of work.
What we've got here is a low-tech chicken tractor. It's as simple as it looks. It's a mobile chicken cage, and it's built to fit exactly over the width of the vegetable bed, so that during the winter, Mandy can have this just trundling along the vegetable bed 1 metre a day. And as the chickens are in the house at night, they're manuring onto the ground, and then during the day they're let out into this cage here, where they're scratching all the wireworms and insects out of the soil, and also weeding and manuring during the day as well. And there's a little egg box around the back. So very simple design, and it's just incorporating chickens into vegetable growing.
Despite the opportunity for high productivity and increased employment, government subsidies for small-scale organic farming are pitiful. For less than 5 acres, there's no running subsidy. On this farm, diversity is crucial, and it pays to keep as many irons in the fire as possible. Blacksmith Mark Lumley has his forge in redundant farm outbuildings, which helps to enrich the local economy. Another aid to cash flow is charcoal production, which has environmental spin-offs as well.
Most of the charcoal we burn in England is imported from countries such as Papua New Guinea. They're rainforest countries, and often the wood that you get in charcoal is rainforest wood or mangrove swamps. This is British charcoal, and I think it accounts for about 3 to 5% of the charcoal market in Britain. And by making charcoal in Britain, not only are you stopping that rainforest destruction, but you're also helping to preserve the small English woodlands that are on many farms. A lot of these woodlands are unfenced, and the stock gets in and eats the new growth. By taking out a commercial crop like British charcoal, it then becomes worthwhile for landowners to fence that woodland off, and then you get the regrowth of the woodland. So British charcoal is really acting on 2 levels. It also means that for a landowner like myself, where you've got maybe 60 acres, it's an amazing extra income to the farm. We make about £3,000 or £4,000 a year from producing charcoal on the farm here, and that's often the difference between being profitable and not being profitable. It's a homemade kiln. It's built out of old water mains, but it produces extremely fine charcoal.
The main income from the farm comes from sales of beef, lamb and pork. Traditional breeds are used for their flavour and suitability to a low-input farming system. Such free-range animals reared in stress-free surroundings produce high-quality meat. Once again, personal contact with local markets is essential to maintain a viable turnover.
Apple. Yeah, pork and apple sausages, they're selling like hotcakes. Yep. Right, okay. Brilliant. That will be coming in this Thursday. Okay? Great. Cheerio then. Bye-bye.
Both marketing and production need very careful planning to be successful.
With broad-scale permaculture, you have to have a strategy for dealing with large acreages of grassland. I've seen several sites where the stock are removed from the system and all that happens is chaos. Lots of thistles and docks and biomass. I think that having stock in a system where you can keep a reasonably good grass lay is a very good way of holding the landscape down. Grassland in pasture in England is part of our culture and it's part of our history. But we have Angus cows, mostly Angus cows, and we've chosen that breed because it's a low input, low output system. They're not fed on concentrates or soya or barley. We graze them during the summer, and during the winter they're fed silage, which we cut from the farm here. We sell our meat direct, so we have to concentrate on our local markets. And the way that this works is when a beast is ready to kill, we will ring up one of our customer organisers in Bristol, and she will ring round about 20 of her friends and get orders for meat from those friends. We will then kill that beast to order. It'll go to the local abattoir and then to the local butcher, who will butcher the carcass down. And then we pack the meat into the 20 different orders, put it in the van and deliver it straight into Bristol. And the customer organiser gets 10% cut for doing that work. And this means that a rather middling Angus store, which would fetch probably about £450 to £500 at Gloucester Market, we can often take between £1,000 and £1,100 for the same animal, simply because we're cutting out the middleman and we're putting the work in ourselves to sell the meat direct. And this has extraordinary implications for land use in England, because we can make 3 or 4 times the profit out of one cow and therefore take the stocking pressure off the land. And it has implications for cattle welfare and for overgrazing as well. I think for small farms such as this, selling direct is really the only way forward, especially since consumers become more and more confused about issues such as BSE and cattle welfare systems. If we have customers who come onto the farm and can visit us here and understand the stock that we've got and talk to us direct, we can explain food scares such as BSE in more detail, and what we're finding is that our relationship with our customer becomes more and more robust as these food scares unfold.
In a permaculture system, fertility is not bought in a polythene sack. As far as possible, it must be produced on site by recycling animal and vegetable wastes. And with a bit of innovative design, it's possible to produce a surplus for sale.
No permaculture plot is complete without its obligatory patch of comfrey. This is Bocking 14 comfrey. It's a very high protein comfrey, and it sets seed, but the seed is sterile, so it doesn't spread. So you can plant it on your farm and you know that it won't take over. We use it for making liquid plant manure. The way that we do that is we simply cut the comfrey with a scythe and fork it into a big black barrel behind me, which holds about 1,500 litres. And out of the bottom of that barrel, in about a month's time, comes black liquor, which we then pasteurise and bottle and sell to garden centres. The comfrey patch is fertilised by the manure from the cattle during the winter. We bring our cattle in from December through till April, and then we compost that manure from April through to September. So we'll turn the manure 3 times under cover. And from the manure, from the composting process, comes an effluent, which is like a liquid, very strong liquid manure, which we'll pipe down through this blue pipe, and it comes out and fertilises the comfrey patch. So we're catching that fertility before it runs off the farm, and then growing it back into the comfrey leaves and producing plant liquor from it and selling it into garden centres. You can never have enough compost on a farm. This is a composting loo, and behind me there is a normal toilet unit, but instead of a U-bend underneath, there's just a hole in the bottom, and you dump down through the hole into a wheelie bin down below me. We've also fitted the wheelie bin with a very small 12-volt fan, so that creates a slight vacuum in the unit down below, and that minimises the smell. And that's vented out through a vent pipe at the back, and it uses about £1 worth of electricity every year, so it's very minimal energy use. We use an ash and sawdust soak, which we mix in, and that creates a dry compost and helps the wheelie bin compost the manure properly. A wheelie bin should take about 5 to 6 months before it's ready to be changed, and before it's filled up. And at that time, we take one wheelie bin out, we put a second wheelie bin underneath. So the first wheelie bin sits for another 5 months, composting, before that's eventually turned out. And we use that compost around the fruit trees, not directly onto food crops. So by keeping human manure separate from water, we haven't got all the pollution problems of conventional sewage systems, where you have to then separate the manure out from the water again, either through reed beds or through conventional sewage systems.
There's a lot to learn at Ragman's, and the compost toilet is part of a visitor complex where courses are held. In the spacious surroundings of the newly converted barns, they teach the principles of permaculture. We need this knowledge. Every year, an area the size of the state of Kansas is lost due to unsustainable farming practices. Permaculture offers a viable alternative to such destruction, which can be practiced at any level between backyard and bioregion. Its easily understood techniques are readily adaptable to local conditions anywhere on Earth, and it holds out the hope of sustainable lifestyle and food production for everyone.
And this really is ultimately a definition of sustainability, something that can go on and on and on, a little bit like a horse neighing in the background.
Take two.
It can also, because it's about cycling energy and recycling resources, you can apply permaculture design to even the smallest environments, like sorry, he got a fly in his ear.
Be straight. You can never have enough compost on a farm. I'm standing in a composting loo. No, I'll say that again. I'm not standing in the loo.
Yeah, the community composting project was, I started it really about 5 years, no, it wasn't 5 years ago, I'll do it again, I think. It's 3 years ago.
You can see the rate of growth from this chinampa. I put this willow in March this year. It's now July, so 5 months later, we've got 9 feet of growth. So you can see the phenomenal rate of growth from this system.